That's another aspect of Englishness. I'm told that I should provoke you into asking questions. I'm rather chary of starting too soon because I only have about 14 answers. But if any of you feel moved to shift me on to somewhere else, I would be personally frightfully grateful. Yes,
You have to travel all around the world, meeting very important people, and each country has its own particular versions of protocol. How would you distinguish and describe the different countries that you visited in terms of their protocol, and how do you cope with it?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, because there's a charming incident in Yugoslav protocol. There was a huge gentleman who was unfortunately killed in an air crash. The Prime Minister under Tito, called Mr. Bjedic, a Mohammedan from the middle of Yugoslavia, and who was a comrade of Tito's up in the hills during the war, inseparable bodyguard. And he was eating at a banquet next door to the American ambassadress, and Tito on the other side. And he was explaining details of the partisans to the American ambassadress, and went, and on the fourth day, they were attacking, and Tito noticed that and said, Bjedic. When the two divisions were already, they were, Bjedic. And I was coming together in a clash. Bjedic. Knife. Who? There was a wonderful clash of protocols at the giving out of the Erasmus Prize, which was won in The Hague by Ingmar Bergman and Charlie Chaplin. I had to go and make a speech for Charlie Chaplin at his request, because he said he was too shy. Well, I'm just as shy as he is, but I did it because it was not for me. It was much easier to make the speech. But I was the warm-up man, because as soon as I'd finished, he got up and he spoke for a very long time. But I remember Queen Juliana, who was very short-sighted, and a very charming lady, who suddenly didn't see the Swedish emissary anymore because Ingmar Bergman couldn't come himself, so that it was somebody from the palace who came. And she suddenly said, there was a lady here before, and the woman was down there in the deepest curtsy you'd ever seen. And I was standing next to her, I tried to indicate she was on the... terrible shock. Queen Juliana got a terrible shock and said, please stand up. And the woman stood halfway up and said, it is done this way in Stockholm. And Queen Juliana said, well, when you are in Rome, you must really do as are doing the Romans. It's not done here. Stand up. And the woman shot up. And Queen Juliana, whom I'd never met before, took me aside and said, I hope I haven't hurt that woman's feelings. But you know, I hate being treated as though I'm something different from everybody else. They also think that I'm narrow-minded. How can I be narrow-minded that have had nearly every meal in my life in a room with 8 famous Rubens paintings in it?
You know the White House well. Have you met the Reagans? And does Nancy Reagan run things as we're told she does?
Well, we were at the White House, and I have no compunction in telling you about this because it was in all the papers, but we were actually there at the moment when suddenly there was a little... I was at the same table as Nancy Reagan and a very sculptural ballet dancer of great talent called Suzanne Farrell, who, like many ballet dancers, give the impression of being remote and choreographic. Forgive me. You know what I mean? It's sort of unattainable and wistful. But she was a very good conversational friend. And suddenly there was a bing, 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 and Reagan got up and said, just want to raise this glass of mine in this White House of ours to welcome the Prince of Wales and his lovely Lady David. And suddenly I felt a grip like that. It was the ballerina who suddenly, as though I was a runaway motorbike. And she said, "What did he say?" And I said, "Don't worry, he's thinking of next weekend at Camp Diana." What was perhaps a little more disturbing was when 12 o'clock came and we started drifting out, and I said to my wife, "I think we'd better say goodbye." And she said, "Yes." And I went up to him and spoke very loudly and clearly and said, "Thank you very much for inviting us, Mr. President." And he said, "Well..." And I was standing so close to him, I couldn't go away without saying something else, I thought. So I said daringly, "You won't remember this, but almost 40 years ago, I invited you to dinner in London, and we dined together at a restaurant called Les Ambassadeurs." And he said, "Oh, wow." "Oh, golly." "Which ambassador was that?" I thought of that the other day when we were with the television crew on the Great Wall of China, which is very precipitate. It's a very tiring wall altogether. It's full of people going in both directions. And I met on that wall somebody I'd been, when I was working in Salzburg during the summer, so somebody was conducting next door, and I never managed to see him, Horst Stein. And I ran into him on the Great Wall with all his orchestra, and we conversation. It's that kind of wall. And suddenly I stopped. I was absolutely exhausted, and the camera was going, and I said, "All right, at this very spot, both Reagan and Nixon gave up. They were too bereft of any stamina. There was nothing left at all, either and all." And I'm told that Nixon, when he got here, said, "Well, it's a great wall." And but I felt sure that Reagan had said, "This great wall of ours, of theirs." Anyway, it's a most fascinating personality because since the Americans are a grand sporting nation, they love to see a man who can admit he's wrong, and occasionally Reagan does something which are really quite extraordinary and then goes on the air and says, "I guess I made another boo-boo." And everybody says, "Oh, God, to be in that position," and oh. I can see, Clive James.
You being such a fastidious and elegant man, I suppose when you were in the army, you were a very neat and disciplined soldier, were you?
Quite right. I think you must have read somewhere that I wasn't. Some report or other. That was the time that I met David Niven, who told me that there had been a general at Sandhurst who was controlling some of these exam papers and not passing people. And he came out with a wonderful remark, which I'm sure that he was too gifted to be a really good general, because he said about one candidate, he sets himself extremely low standards, which unfortunately he fails to live up to. That was another of the saving graces, was the proximity of humor all the time, because we had at that time some of the last sergeants